Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. I mean, we start, so we have to go here all the time.
Okay, we are 7 o'clock. So I'd like to call the May 13th meeting of the Monona Plan Commission to order. Can you call the roll, please?
Yes. Mr. Holmberg?
I'm sorry? Was that me here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Holmberg. Ms. Fowler?
Here.
Mr. Stein?
Here.
Sierra Miller? Here. Doug Plowman? Alder Moore?
Here.
Alder Thomas?
Here.
Mr. Holmquist?
Here.
Ms. Fox?
Here.
Mr. Peterson?
Here.
Great. Before I ask for approval of the minutes, just want to take a minute. We have some new faces in the crowd. I want to take a minute to give people an opportunity to introduce themselves. And so I'm going to start with Director Plowman. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening. Good evening, everybody.
Let our audience know who
Yes.
you are.
Doug Plowman. I'm the new city planner here at the City of Monona. Third week on the job, I think, and first Plan Commission meeting. So looking forward to working with you all. I've already shared a few emails, but excited to be here.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Corinne?
I'm Corinne Fallon, and it's my first meeting. I've lived in Monona for 13 years now, and I'm excited to be able to be involved a little bit more.
Great. Great. Thank you. Josh?
Hi all, Josh Peterson, also a relatively new, well actually a very new resident in comparison to you, Corinne. I've been here for less than 2 years, but I also sit on the facilities committee.
Right. And your day job is?
Day job, I was just promoted today, so
Oh.
Director of Workplace Development at American Family Insurance, so responsible for design, construction, and space allocation.
Great. Congratulations. And Corinne, do you want to fill us in a little bit more about your background?
Sure. I work at the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection. I work in the conservation programs there and the agency liaison for the Bureau of Land and Water Resources.
Great. Thank you. And Alder Thomas, would you like to say anything about your repositioning, if you will?
No.
No?
There's nothing to fix. I'm on the council, and it's good to be back, and it's good to be back here.
Great. Thank you. I also want to take the opportunity to publicly acknowledge Griff, who is, by his own choosing, decided that he would prefer the mayor find someone else, but he served this plan commission, I believe, since 1986, which is unbelievably extraordinary. And I am going to arrange a time with him that we can all get together and thank him for that service. Since there was some connoitering around that departure. So, with that, can I have a motion to approve the minutes from April 8th, 2019? Approval. Do I have a second?
Second. And the only thing I noticed one little thing on the very end where it talks about the next meeting is that Doug Plowman will be starting on should be May 16th, 2019. Typo. That's all.
Okay.
That was all I
A
saw.
typo in the minutes. Great. Any other additions, corrections, deletions? Okay. Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Great. Motions, the minutes are carried. Don't have any appearances this evening. We don't have any unfinished business, so we'll move right to new business. Number 6A, public hearing on the request by Tom Sanford for zoning permit following a period of discontinued use for a new tenant, Mississippi Valley Regional Blood Center at 6330A Cops Avenue, case number 2-003-2019. Tom, would you like to go up to the podium? Introduce yourself to start. Thank you.
Okay, I've done some brokerage consulting and development since 1998 here. Never done anything in Monona, so this is the first time. So, don't beat me up. But, the landlord that owns this property is a good guy. He was my client, now he's my friend. Josh Duggan, he's a good businessman. He owns Chem Dry, one of the tenants, and he has a restoration business. You know, I had a stroke 3 years ago that affects my speech sometimes, so just bear with me. Anyway, you know, if you look at that property, it's always clean, immaculate. The inside, some of them look like the Taj Mahal inside. You know, he really does very well with his properties. So this prospective tenant, I am very impressed with them because they want to do this on May 29th, but you know, Memorial Day killed that idea. So this is really moving very quickly, speed of light in my world. And I have to tell you, I've been so impressed to work with these people from this blood center. Very professional. They signed the lease subject to this meeting. And I'm sure that you got all the information. Do you have any questions that I can answer?
We'll get to that after the public hearing. Great. There are no others here to present, so that being the case, I will close the public hearing and we'll move on to, and stay right where you are, Tom.
Okay.
And I'll move right to B, which is consideration of action on request by Tom Sanford for zoning permit following a period of discontinued use for a new tenant, Mississippi Valley Regional Blood Center at 6330A Cobbs Avenue, case number 2-003-2019. Doug, do you have a report?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. This application is coming before the Plan Commission because of a period of discontinued use. Chapter 480, 52B2 talks about if there's a use that's discontinued for a period of 6 months or more, a zoning permit shall be required. The space has been vacant since June 2017. I would like to point out that this is a very similar use as a lab process and lab use. That's shown in the tenant improvements that would just be, it's only a sink and a data cable, so it's very limited build-out required. The space is just over 3,000 square feet, located in the CDD, the Community Design District, in the eastern portion of Monona. The information that you have that was provided by Mr. Sanford, as well as the additional information. I just had a couple of clarifying questions that I wanted to bring up, specifically regarding the uses around in the same building, you know, with a couple other users, what hours they keep, what type of service they offer, and those types of things. So that's all being clarified, and that's in the document dated April 30th. Once again, the busiest time for this use is 6 a.m. to 4 p.m., so still pretty normal business hours. Very limited use and visitors expected, a couple drop-offs here and there, but limited parking requirements. The parking itself, the complex has 30 spaces, 5 of which would be allocated to this, but I've been assured, and you know, just through my own research, there's very little parking demand for others, so I think there's some overflow there should that be needed. And really, that's about it in terms of the application.
Okay, great, thank you. Now we'll move to questions on the consideration action. Chris, do you have anything?
Well, for starters, I think welcome to Monona. Thrilled your client wants to be here. Welcome them with open arms. I think it's an appropriate use for the area. It's very similar to what was there. Normally we like to have 2 hearings so we can go over things with you, get a feel for it, and then have a second hearing, but I agree with staff on this one. It's pretty simple, so I would agree that it's appropriate in this case to go with the 1 hearing. I visited the site. I would agree that the owner does a very nice job of keeping it up. The one thing I noticed when I was there was there's no addresses on the building. So I would think emergency services, the police or fire might want to take a look at that. And I would recommend we have a condition on here about working with staff to get some addresses on the building.
What I noticed when I was down there is there is a number, but it's on the inside facing, it's not on the roadside.
Yes, and then the one garage door way back has it, but there should be something on the building
But
right
there
out by
is
the
on
road.
that.
There, on the sign, it says, it gives the range of numbers, and then when you turn the corner and drive by, it's on it's hard to see from the road.
It is, and what I'm worried about, especially at night, if fire or police comes there should be something obvious on the building. Generally, we ask to see something on the building. And there is one on the one garage door, but it's way back. At night, you wouldn't see that.
Well, and it doesn't face, there is something there, but it doesn't face the road.
Right.
Where we would be approaching it from. That's a minefield, but.
No, that's a
I think
good-
the safety
good
would
point.
be-
Yep. Okay. Corrine, do you have anything?
Not at this time.
Okay, great. Rob?
I have no additional comments. I think it's
No
appropriate.
additional comments? Okay. Kathy?
No, I'm fine with it, but I was just curious, do they store it and then transport the blood to the,
Yeah, they have two vans that deliver the bloods to all the different hospitals. So that's basically, I said, well, do they go back and forth? No, they just load them and go. So it's like one trip. So 2 vans, 1 trip every day probably. So it's not a lot of traffic. And
and
that's
the
on that
vans will
street.
fit in? I wondered about the size of the vehicle, but it's a van.
Like caravans, you
Yeah,
know,
maybe, yeah.
nothing huge.
Yeah.
They have box trucks when they deliver their supplies, typically at the night.
I'm
So-
sure the landlord will be happy to have that space filled, and so will we.
Yeah, honestly, the old tenant, Recombinetics, they actually paid their lease will terminate this December. They paid every month, even though they have not been there. It's like an internal conflict, so they just said, no, we're not gonna deal with this space in Monona. So that's why, that really is the reason that it has not been occupied, because my client had the luxury have lease every month, payments. And, I had another tenant and a couple times, and they just a good fit, but this one really is perfect. And again, their tenant improvement is 1 sink, that's it, which make it easy,
Thank you.
so.
Brian?
No comments, seems appropriate.
Yeah.
Same thing, no concerns?
No concerns.
Josh? Good? Okay. Great. That being said, do I have a motion?
Move approval.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay.
Can I ask that we just add the condition of address on the building coordinated with staff?
Yes.
Okay. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you very much. Appreciate
Thank
you
you very
coming.
much.
Welcome to
Oh,
Monona.
Thanks, Chris. Good to see you. Okay. Have fun.
Thank you.
We're going to move to 6C, public hearing on the recommendation of City Council on a sign ordinance update as requested by the City of Monona, case number 2-001-2018. Attorney Cole.
Thank you. I was asked to be here by the City Council with regard to one of the issues in the sign code. In your packet, there is a outline from myself of the old language that was at issue and the new language I'm proposing. This specifically relates to political yard signs. The language that was in the draft that was presented to the council stated, for electoral purposes, a maximum of 1 yard sign per candidate or 2 yard signs for each referendum issue on the ballot is permitted within a relative period relating to elections. As I understand the concern, which mirrors concerns in a lot of communities, is the during elections, a proclivity of some to put many political yard signs up and leave them up for a protracted period of time, and the concern to reduce clutter and the number of signs in the city. This sign code was initially instituted, revised in response to the Reed decision in the Supreme Court, which, as you may all know, the sort of takeaway from that thing is it has to be content neutral. If it's not content neutral, then the courts review it under what's called strict scrutiny, which is the highest level of scrutiny. It's often said that under strict scrutiny, rarely does any regulation survive. I mean, it tends to be just the death knell of regulations. So what you need to do under Reed now is any speech regulation is either going to be strict scrutiny or intermediate scrutiny. If it's content neutral, it's intermediate scrutiny. If it is content based, it's strict scrutiny. So by leaving in the old language, since it referenced 1 yard sign per candidate or 2 yard signs per reference, content based, a court would have to look to the sign to decide what applied. Additionally, promulgated that, in all honesty, is very hair-splitting compared to with what you have. It's content neutral in the sense that a court does not have to look at the sign at all. I believe it still accomplishes what the city is looking for, though, in that it limits signs, it allows the political expression of people to a degree, to the degree of 6 signs, and it also limits that to the electoral period of time without implicating the problems in Fedorowicz and all these other cases that say if somebody wants to keep a political sign up year-round, that's their right under the First Amendment. So under the proposed language, if somebody wanted to have a political sign up year-round, they certainly could, because under your draft, they're entitled to 1 yard sign. During a relevant period of time that coincides with an election period, the sign number is increased. It's still content neutral because, in all frankness, while it's 6, they don't have to put political signs up. They could put 6 signs up that have nothing to do with politics. So it does keep it content neutral, but then after the relevant period of time lapses, the 6 number then reduces back down to the 1, accomplishing the goal of so many municipalities, and that's to avoid sort of this increasing just number of signs and the distraction and the clutter that it causes. So that is the point of this. It is, as I say, a bit of hair splitting, and it's by no means, no court has blessed this language yet. In all frankness, the absolute safe approach, if you wanted to totally comply with Reed, is you would just not have any time limitation at all, not have it pegged to any election, just say you're entitled to X signs, no matter what period of time. That would limit political speech more so than what this does. And that's why most communities are following this approach, to allow some greater degree of political speech during an election period, but then afterwards that elevated amount comes down, but still maintains some degree of political speech opportunity year-round. So that's what that language is drawn off.
Great, thank you. I'm going to close the public hearing on number C, public hearing on the recommendation. and move to consideration of recommendation to the City Council on sign ordinance update as requested by the City of Monona, case number 2001-2018. Now open for discussion. Chris, would you like to?
Sure. I actually like the verbiage. I think we had a lot of debate here about it and had a hard time figuring out how to do it and accomplish what's virtually accomplished. One question, I see that you're allowing signs up to 12 square feet, and we were only doing 6 square feet. What was the reasoning for that?
That was numbers I arbitrarily picked.
Because in our sign code for the rest of the year, these signs are limited to 6. So I'm not sure we want to go to 12 square feet on yard signs.
Right.
So,
And that's an absolutely fair consideration. I was just looking at the schematic of it.
Mhm.
The specifics of it obviously is for you as a policymaker.
right, if you go into the, like, 11 by 17 on those signs was allowed for that particular type of signs, 6 square feet.
Right.
So I would suspect we want to keep to that.
Right.
Okay.
I would agree.
And then one other question, I didn't go through your version that you sent back to us word for word with the one we sent to the council. Is there anything else in there that's changed from what we sent to the council?
Well, the only other change, I kept the relevant period of time the same. This says during the political period, it increases to 6.
Any item in the sign code other than this that's changed from what we sent to the council?
No, there was the provision in the temporary miscellaneous signs that were defined with respect to whether or not it was commercial speech, which again was a content-based classification. So I had recommended that reference to commercial speech be removed.
Is that in the footnotes? Temporary miscellaneous is on page 15. Or is that under the definition section?
Under your old draft, it was page 6, definitions and rules related to temporary miscellaneous sign use. And temporary miscellaneous sign, a temporary sign that does not contain a commercial message.
Okay.
So I recommended deletion of the language that says that does not contain a commercial message.
Okay.
Other than that change and the one I just spoke about, those were the only two changes that differed from what you had recommended to council previously.
Just for discussion for the commission, especially since we have 3 new people, we debated that quite a bit because there's a lot of signs now where they'll say, slow down, it's good for our kids. Coal attorneys, escort. And it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So what we talked about is like, we have these yard signs, we really allow somebody to come up there and, if that's out, basically put in advertising to everybody that likes their yard for their business. But you're saying you really can't limit that.
Right. It's a valid policy concern that a lot of communities share. Unfortunately, it makes it content-based.
Yes.
Since you're on that topic, I wanted to bring up something that actually the mayor brought up at the meeting, which was if you have a sign in your yard, like she's got a sign in her yard, I don't remember what it's about, but it's something about keep your drains clean or something like that. So and she said if I have a garage, and we say you can have one of those in there, but she said if I want to have a garage sale, then it means I can't also in addition put up a garage sale sign.
No. We have made an exception for that because the drain sign is permanent in there year-round. The yard sale sign would not be there year-round. So we have an accommodation for temporary signs versus permanent signs. And we say one permanent.
I don't, if it's a cardboard sign, I don't think we consider that as a permanent sign. I don't. And you could keep it up for 6 months and it wouldn't be permanent. So I think her concern was did we mean to keep it to one, and is that causing flexibility, or could she put up 2 signs without being in violation of the code?
Well, and that was the question I was going to ask. She was saying that she felt like 2 was more reasonable, and so I was going to bring up that question of, did we want to stick with 1? Because it does say 1 per site, and it does have a yard sign may be displayed permanently, but typically is not. There's a footnote there, so it's confusing. But for all the categories of yard signs, it says 1 per site, period. So I just wondered, since it's coming back to us, if we wanted to revisit that and what people thought about having 2 instead. Because I think that's a common problem. I mean, there are a lot of people that have.
Yeah, I don't think we have an accommodation in there right now for that.
I thought we had I thought we had an accommodation for 1 permanent, and then you could have temporary ones on top of that. So that's why.
These are all under the temporary. Don't have a permanent sign.
Are there other concerns about that, or do you remember they?
It was just the clerk.
She may have been just bringing that up.
I think that was her point. Was she was just saying, well, then I would need to swap my sign out.
Right.
Which is exactly
Which is
what
maybe
you're
what we
saying.
prefer. I just thought it was worth bringing
Yeah.
that up again.
I mean, it'd be worth noting under the proposed language now, within 30 days of an election, she wouldn't have to swap them out because the limit goes up to 6.
And on that note, is 6 just an arbitrary number as well?
It is.
I would like to see that reduced as much as possible, honestly. Going back to our conversation, that was the goal of what we were trying to do, and I don't think 6 is. From 1 to 6 is.
Yeah, I can tell you the basis that IMLA, the Lawyers Association that did this, they were balancing the with respect to political speech. It gets very sensitive. There's strong First Amendment rights there, and the courts scrutinize political speech. There were cases attempting to regulate these type of signs that were overturned on the grounds that they didn't allow complete expression. For instance, if you had a house and you had a mom, a dad, and 2 adult kids living there, and they all supported different candidates. If the case involved that I'm thinking of limited you to 2 political signs. And it was challenged on the grounds that, well, that disenfranchised 2 of the people in the household. They couldn't express their political views because they were limited to 2. So IMLA was trying to balance, okay, we don't want to allow an unlimited number, but we don't want to be viewed as infringing political speech. And I think the 6 number was sort of a compromise to try to get to a number that would be unlikely to infringe upon political speech that way.
That makes sense. On that note, I would like to see that reduced and be conservative in how our community approaches that.
Other comments? Yeah.
I think that's difficult because if you take the spring election, for example, there will be 3 open spots, people running for 3, that's on the council. If you've got the school board, you've got 2, that's fine. If you've got a county board, so there are multiple offices where people are running. And so if you limit it to 2, do you have to pick one council person you would support and one school board person? And if the mayor was running? So I think that in the spring election at least, there are a lot of offices that are up, and people tend to put in signs for the candidates they support, and it could easily get up to 6, I think.
And I don't think that's I don't know, then why 6, why not 10? If there's elections and there's positions and there's people with signs, why not 12? Why 6? Like at some point you have to make a decision of why are you 4 signs or you're 2 signs. Right. It's not content based, it's a number.
Yep.
I don't think there are a lot of people who put that many signs up, but there are some mayors. The last 2 mayors have typically put up a sign for every alder who's running, so you could have 5 people running for council, for example. I think 6 is kind of a compromise because that would fulfill the needs of most people. And if somebody put in 7 or 8, it would be up to, I guess, if somebody complained about it, they'd probably take 2 out. But 6 seemed like a reasonable number. It is arbitrary. 10 seems like a lot. More than 15. I mean, I'm not a big sign fan either, so I get where you're coming from. But I think during that limited period of time, this is a sign community. People do look at yard signs. People like to put them up, and I think limiting it to less than 6 would be tough. Not to do it.
I don't think it would be. I think we would make a decision.
Well, we could.
I don't know why we're a sign community. I don't know what that means. Have opinions?
Right.
Sure. I think what we're talking about is one per candidate, one per issue, and that way it was kind of self-limiting based on the election period. Like, unfortunately, we don't have that ability anymore, and balancing that with ability to have speech related to political campaigns, I think it's an appropriate thing to have an adequate number, and at the same time keep it somewhat limited. And I'd say, like, why 6? I don't know, I could see it actually being somewhat more. And actually being relatively reasonable. And if we wanted to look at shrinking the time period, I'd rather shrink the time period than shrink the access to political speech in your yard.
Yeah.
And the
tightening that up much more. Is that a fair assessment, you think, Nancy?
Yeah. But that being said, obviously this body should do and vote what we feel is
Absolutely.
regardless of what the council, yes.
Are we able to, in this bill, have that number fluctuate with the items on it? Because we're tying the time period to an election, can we tie the number to the number of items on the ballot? We're not regulating the sign by content, we're regulating the number by an area that's associated with a period of time. So if there's 3 seats and there's 2 referendum items and a county supervisor, it identifies a fixed number and it allows opportunity. It doesn't limit that speech. But then on another election where there's only 2 items on the ballot, there would only be 2 signs.
If it were an issue of making that 6 number, making it variable depending on the number of candidates, or legally you could do it. It may be hard in practice to figure out how to do that. You could do it as long as a reviewing court would not have to look at what the sign says at all. So yes, I guess to your point, if you said the number is 6 unless there are more than 4 candidates for office, or more than 4 issues on a referendum, then the limit is 8. That would be a content neutral regulation.
Yeah, I'm even suggesting the number of elected seats. So if there are 4 people running but only for 3 seats and then 2 referendum items, I'm really suggesting 5 in less than the 6.
You're walking awfully close though to then you're almost compelling political signs, because to the point, right now you could put 6 I love McDonald's Big Mac signs up. You start going the route you're going, then pretty soon are you required to not have a McDonald's sign? You have to have a sign for an elected candidate?
But aren't we doing that by saying the time period?
No, because admittedly the time period is conveniently similar to the election period. But within that period, the 6, you can have 6 that say anything.
Well, the other thing I would say, just in relation to that, is that I think we need to keep in mind that during, to use Kathy's example of the spring election, we're not just talking about local referendums and local candidates.
Mm-hmm.
We're also talking about county and statewide and other elections, obviously federal. So the number of candidates obviously could be a lot more than just
School board, the county.
right.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the consistency and having people understand what they can and can't do. So I think having that variable sign number would be difficult. But I guess I understand the concern that it might look cluttered or there might be a lot of signs, but if it is for a short period of time, and if that's what somebody feels they need to do, I don't think that restricting it anymore would be necessary. I was wondering, is this one of the reasons that the commission was asked to look at the sign code because of the temporary signs? Was there an impetus to?
We were asked to look at it, the sign code as a whole, because as Attorney Cole explained, there was a ruling by the Supreme Court
For that.
related to contract neutrality, and so virtually every municipality has had to redo their sign code around that, and these issues were particularly. It was actually a recommendation that Attorney Cole made initially to this committee, and we accepted. He reviewed the entire code and gave us all kinds of feedback on it, and we accepted everything that he said, except for this one we were still struggling with for exactly the reason that we're struggling with it right now, really, of trying to sort of limit clutter and at the city council meeting it was clear we needed to come back to it because, again, of the contract neutrality. Yeah.
I might add, we also had on our agenda for the last 4 or 5 years to review our sign code. It was antiquated, it was confusing, and it was actually contradictory between sections. So I mean, it's been something in our work plan for a long time. It's just overwhelming. You're lucky you're here only for this committee. We actually had a subcommittee debate it, and then we brought it here and debated it again.
Okay. Any other comments before I look for some amendments or a motion? Yes, Chris.
I tend to stick with the 6 signs, keep it simple. I want to eliminate clutter as much as anyone, and you know that. But during the political season, I think there's a lot of very motivated people in the area, and I suspect that council would change it anyway. I don't think 6 is a lot during the political season, and I would never put 6 in my yard, but some people want to. And as far as the issue with 1 or 2 signs, I would tend to keep it to 1 for now. And, you know, Mary's going to have to pull that 1 sign out when she puts her garage sale in, or she's just going to have to take a chance that the sign police don't come that day.
But she won't take a chance.
No, she wouldn't, because it's a bad example. But I would tend to at least make the recommendation that we keep it with the 1. And if people feel really strong about the 2, then I guess now would be the time to talk about it. We had a large discussion before, and we felt the clutter gets overwhelming.
Susan?
I actually agree with that. I think 6 is a decent compromise. I think your language is fine. I support changing it to that language. I have another question that's slightly different. We've noticed we are, with this code, prohibiting the flag signs. We can come back to this. I didn't know before we vote, get off this topic. And while we and the council have been deciding on passing this, at least 4 of them have cropped up in Monona, 4 or 5. And I'm just wondering what happens when the code, if the code passes and they are not allowable. Do those get grandfathered in, or do they have to take them down? What happens with that?
They're not legal right now.
Oh, they're not.
Now, this sign code actually expands. That's something that everybody forgets.
But
we added so many different sign types in this new sign code. We were very, very tight on what we allowed before. There's a lot that we added, but that was one we specifically talked about. We didn't want anything that was moving, floppy, distracting drivers on primarily Monona Drive.
So are you saying our old sign code already had that in it?
Oh yeah, they're not allowed at all. In fact, our old sign code sandwich boards weren't allowed, for example, which are now.
Right.
And new boards weren't allowed, which are now. Excuse me, there's a lot of different boards and signs in here that are now allowed that we never did before.
Right.
That was actually the hope to expand it and make it a little easier for the businesses. But anything that moves, we haven't allowed.
Well, we have 4 or 5 of them that have been there for a couple of weeks now, so just wondered. Okay.
Okay. Do I have a motion? First, Chris, would you like to make a motion as it relates to the 6 feet as opposed to 12?
Well,
or as it relates to the entire?
How about I make a motion that we recommend to the City Council approval of City Attorney Cole's change to the language, except we modify the 12 square feet to 6 square feet to be consistent with what we have in our sign code. And that includes both revisions. The original where he deleted the commercial message, as much as I hate that, I don't know if we have a choice.
Okay, great. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay.
So this is just for Attorney Coles?
No, we're re-recommending what we recommended to council before. They sent it back to us for the change that Attorney Cole said was really necessary. It's just one revision.
So now it's the whole thing.
We're recommending the entire sign code the way we drafted it with those 2 changes. Is that correct?
Correct.
And those are the only 2 changes.
Correct.
What we originally. So the one we fought over for so long would just have the change that we can't eliminate commercial messages on these temporary signs, and that we now are content neutral on the political season signs.
Corrine?
On page 14, I just noticed number 8 footnotes. Looks like there's an error there.
Oh, yeah, I had it marked there too. It's not finished?
Yeah.
It may just be that it needs to be expanded.
That's what I was thinking, yeah.
That's my old sign code here.
Okay.
It's in print. but they're electronic.
Okay, there's a motion and a second on the floor. Any other discussion before we vote? All those in favor of accepting Attorney Cole's alternative language with the adjustments of 6 square feet instead of 12 square feet, as well as deleting the reference to commercial signage and temporary definitions, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. So I believe there was also, secondary to that was the issue of whether or not one or two signs. Thank you. Thank you, Attorney Cole.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Move to number 7, reports of staff and commission members. Staff report regarding status of development project proposals, potential upcoming items.
Only thing to flag right now is there are
which Chris knows better than anyone over there, especially given the weather we've had as of late. They need to get decisions made quickly. It relates to patios that are being offered or requested by the tasting room, which was not part of the original PIP. And I do not believe the ground floor patio for the Buck and Honeys was part of the original. The upper floor was, but the lower floor was not part of the original. I don't believe.
This patio there, I don't think there's anything special, but there was concrete out there. I think what's different is where they're putting a fence up because of the requirement for alcohol.
Right, right. So I'm not saying the patio per se, but in both cases.
The outdoor area.
Right, the outdoor area, right, in both cases, it relates to both smoking and alcohol. And then you also mentioned that Forage requested.
There are a couple additional structures which the pergolas themselves outside of each of the restaurants. The Buck and Honeys one seems to have been considered by Plan Commission before, but certainly
Yes.
tasting room.
Yes.
They've come in before for certain pieces, but not necessarily for that. So structural, it's our understanding, would be Plan Commission review, whereas the PIP approval language has staff approval administratively for some fencing.
Right.
But there may well be certain items that need to come forward, especially the structural ones.
Do you know if the Forage request is a structural request?
They also have a pergola that's coming forward, yes, on the shared patio there.
Okay. Yeah.
But when you say structural, is the patio?
It's the pergola that is
Oh, the
set
pergola.
within, yes.
So there's and the Forage pergola is on the front side, or the
It's on the shared patio overlooking the park.
okay.
Maybe extra special meeting.
So yes, so we're given the time frame, we're looking at needing to reschedule. Otherwise, we wouldn't be meeting until June 10th, and given the time frame in the park, be pushing it. So I would appreciate it if people could peruse their calendars. Typically, when we are are scheduled to meet on a Monday and it's a holiday, we look at the Tuesday first. So what does Tuesday look like for folks? Is that a possibility?
28th.
The 28th.
It's good by me.
Works for me.
Works for you?
Excuse me, works for me as well.
We have a quorum.
Tentative.
Okay, great.
I suspect it'll be a fairly simple.
I think it will be a simple meeting, but again, just the usual due diligence. So let's plan on the next meeting then being on May 28th at 7 o'clock. And do you, given that, Nicholas, is there anything that you're at this point anticipating for a June 10th meeting? Is there anything in the pipeline, if you will?
Not at this point.
Not at this point. Okay. Great. Then the next meeting will be on the 28th. No, thank you. Any requests for information concerning development? Yep.
One minor thing, I noticed tonight with the applicant for the blood bank, we didn't have a site plan. Typically, we want to see a site plan. We want to see the parking, see the layout, and everything, and they should have a site plan there. This thing was pretty simple, but normally I think that we expected as part of the package. Thanks.
Anything else? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
That was a Chris job.
Move adjournment.
All those in favor?
I
Thank you all.